Big show over in Australia these days. It's called Dr. Bob, and we're going to use their theme this week. Dr. Bob! What do you think, Doc?
A global perspective. That's what we get out of this small little station here.
So much going on. They announced Thursday afternoon, Dr. Robert A. Heineman, Alfred University political science professor emeritus, that ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement's planning raids in New York City this weekend. How do you think that's going to work out?
Well, it's the makings for some more activism, and I guess it's the Trump administration's way of telling New York State that some of their other actions are not particularly appreciated, especially the unlicensed or licensed illegal immigrants who, can now apparently get driver's license. But it may be a little while before they're able to do that. Apparently there's going to be some challenges to that.
Well, another thing that the Trumps wouldn't like out of Washington is this Governor Andrew Cuomo legislation that he signed on to that allows Congress to peek into and release Trump's family business tax return info.
Yeah, I don't know whether it allows them to release it, but yes, I think there are some. I think
so. I think it does make it so they can make it public.
Yeah, well, that's. I think there are some serious legal issues involved there, and we'll just have to see how the courts play with this. But it does have elements of what's called a bill of attainder, and that is a legislative finding of guilt. The Constitution prohibits ex post facto laws and bills of attainder for both the national government and the states. And the bill of attainder, as I said, is a legislative finding of guilt. In this country, to be found guilty, or at least it used to be the case, to be found guilty, you had to be found guilty in a court of law. Congress or a state legislature cannot simply pick you out and attach guilt to you. And I think there's an element of that here in what New York State is doing to Trump, to allow his tax returns, to pick him out and allow his tax returns to be made public. I think has some real elements of that kind of prohibition in them. And so I don't know what basis his attorneys will take this to the courts, but I think any reasonably intelligent attorney could come up with some pretty solid constitutional objections here to what New York has done. It really is kind of sick, really. But we'll see. Maybe there's precedent for this. I don't know.
Dr. Heineman, is there a little Marxism here coming from the left, meaning this whole attitude that Donald Trump is rich, therefore he must be corrupt? Stay tuned. We'll find it somewhere.
Well, I think anytime you have someone who deals with the huge projects that he has dealt with over the years, the possibility of glitches, minor infractions of one sort or another are, they're all over there. Now, I assume his attorneys and his accountants are well qualified, so the idea that he's corrupt, I think, is just simply not the case. However, there's also the whole area of trying to embarrass him in the sense that what kind of charitable deductions has he made, what kind of things has he supported or not supported, what kind of person is this, makes all this money and then doesn't support the SPCA, or I don't know what it would be. So I think that's a bigger element in the whole thing, to tell you the truth.
Pelosi versus AOC, and we're going to get back to President Donald Trump, but...
okay, sure. Don't leave him too far, because he gets irritated
House
if he
Speaker
doesn't
Democrat California Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi versus downstate Democrat Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Right.
Ocasio-Cortez says that Nancy Pelosi has been overloading the AOC congressional office with needless paperwork in order to keep her busy and out of the limelight and away from the cameras. And AOC made that very public. Pelosi is taking her on, and I think that's after a lot of pressure from the left and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to do many things, such as impeach President Donald Trump when Pelosi doesn't really want to, and the condescending attitude that Ocasio-Cortez has towards Pelosi. Your thoughts?
Well, I think Cortez has made it even broader, suggesting that Pelosi is picking on women of color in the Democrat caucus. And I think what's happened here is basically Pelosi is responding to the concerns of a lot of moderate Democrats, some of whom have just recently been elected, who are concerned about having to go out and try to run carrying these people like Cortez on their back as a fellow Democrat. And so I think what Pelosi's doing, and I think she's responding probably to a pretty good number of the Democrats in her caucus, and basically trying to get these people out of the limelight and push them off the side. And she works it right. I think she's got considerable leverage there, and if she has, as I say, a majority of the Democrats behind her, which I would guess she probably does. I mean, there are not that many idiots among the Democrats. So we'll see how successful she is. On the other hand, of Cortez and the media keeps playing her up. Why Pelosi will have a tough time getting her out of the limelight.
On the Jeffrey Epstein case, many conservatives have voiced suspicions on this. One of the motives of the feds going after Jeffrey Epstein again, they believe it's a way to tie Trump to Epstein and bring the president down. There's been so many attempts to bring the president down. That's right. What a lot of conservatives think. And they're also very suspicious that Jim Comey's daughter, who's an attorney working for the Southern District of New York, is running the investigation. That it's going to work out like this. Bill Clinton gets away with everything, and the focus will be Trump or people close to Trump.
Yeah. Well, I do think this has the potential to be a really, really widespread investigation with widespread results and consequences. I think that and this has the makings of a scandal that involves not only top politicians, top government people, but I would almost bet you're going to have top corporate people involved, and I wouldn't be surprised you're going to find some of the media people involved as well. A guy like Epstein can't carry on like this without having a lot of support across the board. So I think it has potential for some widespread consequences, and I would bet that there are some people out there that right now are pretty nervous. And if they get deeper and deeper into his records and things of that sort, it's kind of hard to tell what they're going to bring out. Now, one of the keys, I think, is the women who were in fact victimized by this whole effort, and whether they're willing to step forward and testify. Now, you've got a few already who have stepped forward, but boy, the pressure these people could get, it seems to me, could be pretty severe, or there may be other ways of trying to quiet them down. And that was the point that Acosta made about his plea deal in Florida, that he just couldn't get victims to come forward to testify, and he thought it was better to get some sort of plea deal out of it than to go to trial and lose. I think it has some real potential there. Now, what about the conservatives' idea? I think I just don't buy into that at all. First of all, Trump apparently knew Epstein years ago, and my understanding is that he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago because, some 15 years or so ago, because Epstein was coming on to some of the women there, whether it was staff or whether it was guests, I'm not sure, but clearly Trump had a falling out with him, and I haven't seen anything that indicates that somehow Trump visited any of this island that he had or any of these other places where there's fairly clear evidence that Clinton traveled to this. What did the neighbors call it? The pedophile home or whatever. There.
Pedophile Island, I believe.
Yeah, Pedophile Island. And way back when I think Acosta was looking at this, Clinton's name came up. The implications here I think are pretty broad. But the idea that somehow this is another attempt to tie Trump to something, I think that's a little far-fetched. Not that they wouldn't like to, but it doesn't appear that there's much there. But it does appear that they have quite a bit of evidence here on Epstein's maneuvers, and this could lead to serious problems for a lot of people. And it'll be interesting to see the extent to which the media, for example, just tries to cover this over and avoid it as well. It's
Alan Dershowitz was one of the people named. So was Prince Andrew.
Yeah, I remember his name came up. Yeah.
Now, Alan Dershowitz says the only reason this is happening, Dershowitz says it's a false accusation from a proven liar, and Dershowitz says the only reason this is happening to him is because he's made public statements defending President Trump.
Yeah, well, Dershowitz is pretty nimble. I don't have much use for the guy in any case, but obviously he's in a position where his name may come up again and again here. I don't know.
Dr. Bob, moving on to the women's soccer team. Did you want to talk about them at all?
Not that it's going to make anybody happy. No, I have no use for... it's kind of sad that some of these stars for the women's soccer team have the attitudes and behavior that they do.
You're talking about kneeling down and saying they're not going to the
effing
White House?
Yeah, I brought it up to one of my friends the other day, and he said, well, but they're very good soccer players. Well, you can be a very good soccer player and still be a decent person. And I'm sure most of the team is. But this is just kind of sick, really. So it's sad. It's too bad because they are good soccer players. There's no question about that. But to be the kind of jerks they are is just...
Conservative commentators have been saying that they go over, represent America, then kneel down during the national anthem as much as possible, insult the president as much as possible, and say they'll only speak with Democrats that they agree with and not people like President Trump.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I think they were dragging the flag along there for a while.
Yeah, that happened at one point.
Although I guess some of the other players grabbed it.
There's a women's soccer player whose name escapes me who is a former soldier, and she's the one they say that knelt down and grabbed the flag.
Yeah. No, I'm sure there are many fine ladies there on the team, but to have this kind of representation is just. But again, when you're dealing with these athletes who are obsessed basically with what they're doing, their ability to be especially adaptable socially sometimes is pretty limited. I remember years ago we had this guy, Mark Spitz, who was a swimmer and won I don't know how many gold medals in the Olympics. And there's another guy who was, not that he was taking any kind of ideological position or anything of the sort, but he was not a personable sort of fellow. So they're really focused and obsessed, and sometimes, unfortunately, they're not we might say the most well-rounded people you'd want. But this is kind of sad. Yeah.
Going to take a quick break. We'll be back with Dr. Bob right after this.
McCoy's Auto Collision on State Route 36 just south of Canastillo is a full-service collision shop offering not just collision work, but also paint work. McCoy's has a 24-foot frame straightener with 3-dimensional measurement. McCoy's accepts all insurance companies and can work with you on any deductible you may have. At McCoy's, they work for your interest and your benefit, not the insurance companies. All work is fully warranted and they offer a free loaner car. McCoy's Auto Collision, State Route 36 in Canastillo, where customer satisfaction is always number one. Phone 607-698-9900.
Back with Dr. Robert A. Heineman, Alfred University professor of political science emeritus. The Dow closed at 27,000, Doc.
Yes, setting a new record. And I think the S&P, briefly broke a record, maybe has managed to stay above it now. Some of this apparently is tied to the Federal Reserve. The Chairman Powell, the Federal Reserve Chairman, suggested somewhere along the line that they may have to lower interest rates again. So that may have sparked the market. I don't know. The point is, Brian, the market is the economy is so powerful that the market is simply reflecting the jobs, the income, the basic wealth that's been generated here in the past 2 or 3 years. Here we are in the middle of a trade war with China, and I don't think there's any question about that. It's hurting China quite a bit. But, of course, it is also hurting small businesses in this country as well. So it would be nice if the Chinese and the United States could finally work out some sort of compromise there. And I guess we are talking with the Chinese again. So the thing about Trump is he does keep trying to negotiate, and perhaps we can get to the key here, I think, with the Chinese is to end up something that allows Xi Jinping to save face, and at the same time backs the Chinese off of some of the tactics they've been using over the last 10, 15 years. Because it does appear that our tariffs and such are slowing the Chinese economy down. And the Chinese are doing all kinds of things to try to get around them. They're shipping goods to Vietnam, and then the Vietnam ships them out as being from Vietnam, and other ways to try to get around the tariffs and other kinds of embargoes we have. So I don't know.
Joe Biden, former Vice President Joe Biden, Democrat presidential candidate. This is from CNBC. Biden slams Trump's trade war, but at the same time calls to get tough against China.
Right.
And Joe Biden says President Trump's tariffs on China have only hurt American businesses and consumers. Biden still says, though, that the U.S. needs to get tough on Beijing. Which is it?
Yeah, it does have a bit of a contradiction there, I think. Again, we've said again and again that Trump doesn't want any kind of shooting war. He's made threats of one sort or another, and we have occasionally hit people in the Middle East really, really hard with military action. But Trump doesn't like to do that. Here he is sitting at the head of the most prosperous nation in the world, and it allows us to act economically to get some pretty effective results. For example, the Mexicans now are really clamping down on immigrants trying to cut through Mexico to the Rio Grande. And apparently that's had some effect really on slowing down this the pressure on our southern border. And again, Trump said, you get this under control or you're going to suffer economically. And they apparently have taken the hint. So the use of economic weapons there, I think, is something that some presidents have used here and there, but never to the extent that Trump has really clamped down there. And I might add on this, have we got a minute or two here yet, Brian?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, a British ambassador there that has finally lost his job because his comments about Trump were leaked. That's another example of where Trump comes in and just sort of tosses out the window the way things were done in the past. The British have a long history of diplomatic procedures and protocols that they've used because of the empire, and I guess they're pretty proud of how they approach things. After World War II, for example, and you might check with a couple of your history professors you have here occasionally,
right?
On these points, they really saw the United States and the State Department as a bunch of novices, frankly. I guess we've kind of caught up in that respect, but the Brits have a way of doing things, and Trump has his way of doing things, and clearly he doesn't have much use from some of these procedures that have been developed internationally in the past, and so that the ambassador from Great Britain is unhappy. I can understand that, but Mr. Trump's going to do things the way he wants to do it, and this whole use of economic power, I think, is one aspect of that.
If we could quickly talk about trade in China again one more time.
Well, sure.
This is kind of interesting. Bloomberg reports this week that Walmart says China's factories are getting urgent and desperate. And Bloomberg goes on to say that a trade war has roiled the global supply chain, exasperating in an exodus. And some of the world's biggest retailers like Walmart and Nike are being pushed by American clients to shift production out of China.
Yes.
And
so what's the problem?
What do you make of that?
Well, I think that's probably true. And this what is it? Huawei, this huge electronics and firm that we've just basically embargoed any kind of relationship with this huge firm. It's kind of funny because the Chinese, the Huawei says, well, we're a private industry. Are you kidding me? There's no private industries in China. They do what the government tells them to do. They're slipping down to Vietnam, and what the Chinese are doing is shipping goods down to Vietnam. Vietnam makes a claim that they made a change here or there on them, and then they're trying to export them as Vietnamese goods. And I don't know how long they're going to be able to get away with that. But it's clear the Chinese are hurting, yes. There's no two ways about it. So it's time to kind of come up with an agreement and go back to our happy times of previous.
Happy times we've had today, Dr. Bob.
We tried to put a little grin on people's faces, yes.
Thanks for stopping by.
My pleasure.